For more on this, we want to talk to our Leland Vittert, host of Unbiased and co-anchor of Prime Time, or NewsNation Prime special coverage. Let me get the name right. I'm sure, Leland, there are reasonable discussions around breakfast tables, and they were around dinner tables last night. But do you think there was a new audience introduced to the findings of this committee last night because of the way it was presented and produced?
So many of the things that Allison and Joe said can all be true at once, and that may be what we're getting at. There was a lot of information presented. There was not a lot of new things that we learned happened. We may have learned new evidence for things that people knew or suspected, but if there was a moment to take away that was the oh my God, this is what's going to change the hearts and minds of people and convince those who believe the election was stolen that it was not stolen, or if there was these moments that were going to convince people who thought that President Trump had no idea what was going on, and now all of a sudden, oh, gee, I think he is a terrible person. Those didn't really exist. Politics, is a good friend of mine likes to say, is a game of inches. You said conversations around dinner tables or around breakfast tables. I don't know how many outside of the real political world is talking about this. Certainly, President Trump, if you listen to everything the committee said last night, probably looks worse, or you don't really care, or you don't believe what the committee said. That said, around breakfast tables and around dinner tables, are people talking more about gas prices and about food prices and about the record inflation numbers that came out about 45 minutes ago? Or are they talking about whether or not President Trump wanted to call the people inside the Capitol there illegally or there without authorization? Which one affects you more tonight? That's a decision the American people largely have to make.
Yeah, and I would imagine, you know, as Joe mentioned, this is not a trial. There could be some charges that come as a result of some of these findings, but not right now. Is this more about informing the American people, do you believe, for this committee, or maintaining a certain narrative, keeping this discussion of why this happened and how it can't happen again alive?
Both. And, you know, the fact that this is in prime time and happening in June before people go away for July and August, then come September and October. So you can't really do that there. Most of the people who are sitting on the dais will be out of power come November or come January. So this is their last chance, right, to make the argument, as Bernie Sanders said, that the other guys are worse. And that is the attempt of this committee. And it was really important what you heard last night. Benny Thompson, the chairman, said, we're talking not only about what happened in the past, but proving that democracy is still in danger, which about is as nakedly partisan as you can get. Because what happened in the past are facts. What happens in the future is a matter of political argument. And that trying to prove that democracy is still in danger is half a sentence. The other half of the sentence is, so you must vote for Democrats to protect democracy, or you must vote for Democrats if you want to protect democracy. So much of what you're going to see and hear over the next half dozen or so hearings is trying to prove about what is happening in the future.
One more question for you. I'm sure that you've been on Twitter and you've been seeing what the president, or former President Donald Trump, is saying now, especially about his daughter Ivanka, that in essence, she really shouldn't be involved in any of this. Do you think that his response was par for the course, or what do you think is going to happen now with Republicans and with former President Trump in light of this, again, big primetime hearing?
Twitter is not real life. We all know that. President Trump was on Truth Social, which is his social media platform, which is even less real life than Twitter is, talking about how Ivanka Trump is out of the loop. I don't know about you, Adrian, but I've yet to meet anybody who has a strong feeling one way or the other about President Trump that is swayed one way or the other about what President Trump says or does at any one moment. In that, how many times since 2015 have you or I been on television and thought, whoa, boy, this is it. This is it. He's done. This is the moment. And we were wrong every time. So there is a core group of the Republican Party that supports President Trump and will until the cows come home. So that's sort of baked in. And now you have to sort of decide whether or not Democrats trying to make the 2022 election about Donald Trump, and whether the media will oblige by keeping him in the conversation, is at the very forefront of the conversation when there's so many other problems going on in America right now. 2020 was all about Donald Trump and COVID. But 2022, there's a lot of other issues. And the only thing that could be worse for the media, forget the committee, is being tuned out. And that's something they won't allow. So then they have to decide how much of Donald Trump's responses and how much of this committee's hearings do they want to cover versus the other issues.
Yeah, people are certainly not wanting to be tuned out because we've seen how that played out before. Leland, thank you so much. Hopefully people are in the right frequency. You can watch On Balance with Leland Vittert every weeknight, 7, 6 Central. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.